One, two, one, two. Are they are they on? Do they? I mean,
Yeah, use them. Use
Okay.
them for sure.
okay, okay. All right. So, yeah. Oh, they changed that real fast. Okay, so I am Michael Marion, um, and
I'm Josh Young.
I guess we are going to self-moderate this talk here. So this is going to be cool. So me, I am a Bitcoiner out of Charlotte, affiliated with Bitcoin Charlotte. I do a lot in the organization around Bitcoin education. I think a lot about the topic, and I try to educate as many of the people around me about the basics and benefits of the space. So yeah.
Yeah, and I am also a Bitcoiner, focused more on the adoption of Bitcoin and using it for real life use cases, and particularly been mostly focused in El Zante, El Salvador, where I led a project to do the world's first community where everybody pays for their home in Bitcoin.
And the world's first.
The 3D printed house, yeah.
3D printed house. It's super cool.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, that goes with the Bitcoin ethos because 3D printing is another decentralized technology. You can do all kinds of cool stuff. I just thought it was interesting.
Yeah, for sure. So New Story Charity is a housing organization that focuses on innovation within affordable housing, focusing on things that increase the speed of construction, decrease the cost, all while maintaining the quality of the homes being built, and on top of that, creating a financial path to home ownership. And that's where the Bitcoin comes in, and making it possible for people in Latin America, where typically loan services don't work in their favor.
Yo, you got that pitch down.
Said it a lot of times.
Reducing the costs while maintaining the quality. Nah, that was great. Okay, so I guess we'll self-moderate here. How do you define generational wealth? I think it'd be good to start with a definition. What's your definition?
I suppose I would describe it as being able to pass something down to your children with value. So that could be home ownership. It could be literal wealth, like in terms of net worth, but something substantive, that will last generations. And right now, there are very few things that most people can do that with their kids with. How about you? I'm curious.
Yeah, so I thought a lot about this, and I guess the way it's a similar definition, but the ability to project value into the future. But fundamentally, for me, I try to reduce that down to like what do I think that means in the most decentralized or permissionless way possible. And for me, that's like you have real uninfringible savings. And that is where one of the areas where I think we have gone quite off track in society today. We have basically destroyed the ability of people to save. And so the secondary definition, like what is savings, it's you forego goods and services today for the benefit of enjoying relatively more of those goods and services or some other value accretive goods and services at some point in the future. As we know with the US dollar and how things, and there's some communities like the African American community where structurally we were not supposed to save, we were not supposed to own homes. We were, when we came up with patents or when we owned land, the state or people deputized by the state would take them away. And so the reason I go to what is the most permissionless way is where, with property ownership, you need the state to secure your property ownership fundamentally, if we're talking about physical land. So yeah, that's kind of how I think about it. It's, in the absence of any external authority, saving and projecting value into the future.
And how do you think, I'm presupposing because I know your stance, but how do you think Bitcoin enables more people to do that?
Yeah, so I think it's the kind of that whole, like, what is savings, right? Foregoing goods and services today to enjoy relatively more of those goods and services tomorrow. If you are dealing with a money that is being inflated or debased, then the value proposition is I forego goods and excuse me, I forego goods and services today for the great benefit of enjoying relatively less of those goods and services tomorrow, which is a stupid value proposition. And humans being rational actors, right? There are people who will moralize people's behavior and say, "Oh, look at these people; their values are bad, or they're all short-term thinkers, or all of these things." Well, no, they're given like razor sharp incentives to be exactly that way. If you're punished for saving, you're not going to save. And so, Bitcoin, being a verifiably absolutely finite money system, um, the kind of heuristic there is once people figure it out, essentially the value, like the unit value of Bitcoin, will increase against all other goods and services theoretically indefinitely. So you should hold some, and there's no one stopping you because they can't stop you. Yeah.
I think that there are huge opportunities in Bitcoin to create generational wealth, and in particular, the opportunities it gives to people internationally. I mean, now in the US, there is access to different ways of holding value, and for all the crap we put on the US dollar, it has sustained value comparative to the rest of the world. So there are opportunities for you to look elsewhere. In where I work in Latin America, there really are not opportunities to invest. I mean, for all its flaws, even Robinhood gives us access to invest into stocks that were previously only meant for the wealthy. It was literally just an opportunity. Now they still have resources to help them succeed in that that maybe most people don't have, but the access is the starting point. And Bitcoin is a global access to something that you can hold actual value in. And anybody who holds Bitcoin, whether you're rich or not as well off, you hold the same value of Bitcoin. Not value in Bitcoin, but the same Bitcoin. And
The same rules.
The same rules apply to you that apply to everybody, which is kind of it's unprecedented, really. Yeah. And I think that is the biggest opportunity for creating generational wealth, and is the equality of that investment. I think it's really cool.
So to the topic of Bitcoin internationalism, I definitely agree that there are places in the world where I think a truly de minimis amount of Bitcoin to the average American, if held over the next one or two cycles, would be in that place a relatively, significant to more than significant amount of value, perhaps. And that's the benefit in those places if people can get access, or if access can be spread to those places. But I think the situation is just as dire in many ways in the United States. So when I think of like the millennial generation, now if you are not already a well-to-do millennial who perhaps has your own home or is in a family that has several pieces of property that will be passed down to you, you can be working a lucrative six-figure job, and there's literally like nowhere you can go where you're like, I'm going to buy this property in a place that makes sense, that's going to like deliver value to me in the future. And oh, by the way, if you're buying today, you're probably buying at the top of the market, perhaps in your lifetime. And so even as Americans, then we have this opportunity, having relatively more, you can take a relatively larger position in Bitcoin if you're willing to understand it. And I think that, while there are other places and other currencies in the world where they're going to have a harder time than the United States, the United States can often, in many ways, be like the degenerative engine driving some of these things. And the machine is designed to consume us all. right? No, it's just like that's yeah. And so you have an opportunity to protect yourself, right? Like if someone told you that like, hey, I'm gonna steal from you. Now, if you can't do anything about it, you can't do anything about it. But then it's like, oh, hey, I'm gonna steal from you, but you can do something about it. If you choose not to do something about it, what does that say about you? I'm just gonna let people steal from me. And that's how I feel with like Bitcoin. No one can stop you. You get in there, they can't devalue it, they can't debase it. All you have to do is understand the long-term value incentive. And that's actually, I think, an interesting thing that I like your take on. How has Bitcoin changed or melded with or impacted your values in any way, particularly when thinking long-term generationally?
Yeah, for sure. I just also want to point out that a lot of this is speculative, like especially when we're talking about increases in the markets or even
Very true.
even in real estate. Like we don't know if this is the top of the market for the real estate uh, prospects, but I do know from personal experience that I can't buy a home, even though I make pretty good money and all that stuff. So that part is real. Um, so my take on how it's changed my mindset is I do have a much longer term viewpoint and a more global viewpoint of what's going on in society. Part of that is because I work for an international housing organization. And starting this Bitcoin project was very much inspired by reading about Bitcoin Beach in El Zante. I don't know if you guys read it, but a year and a half, 2 years ago, I saw in Forbes they featured this circular Bitcoin economy, the first in the world. And then I looked at that from a person who's obsessed with trying to look for solutions towards global homelessness and said, wow, this is a huge opportunity for unbanked families to now have access to a financial system that can work for them. We use the Lightning Network because El Salvador was first and Bitcoin Beach was first. A lot of companies have put a stake in that country and in that area. So there are other benefits for those families that we get to take advantage of as well, which is another recommendation of taking a risk is really important and provides opportunities when you're first. And for all of us in this room, it's still very early in the Bitcoin game. There are going to be billion-dollar companies, like multiple billion-dollar companies that still created in the Bitcoin economy that haven't even been thought of yet, right? So it's still very early, and I think that's where the real, generational $20 million plus family value like comes in when you're looking at it specifically from a money perspective. There's the big opportunity. Being first on some of these ideas, and just being in this room, you can get access to different thoughts and ideas that could lead to that innovation. And then internationally, like in El Salvador, 70% of families are unbanked. That was the first research article I read when I dove into after reading Bitcoin Beach. I'm like, wow, that's the opportunity. There are 70% of people in Latin America who don't have access to a housing loan. But, being a charity who takes risks naturally, it was an easy sell. And then we went down and partnered with Bitcoin Beach, and now 250 families have access to housing because of Bitcoin, inspired by at least. So, and that's something that now the title is real, where a lot of the times they don't do it formally. The the land will be theirs after they pay off their home, and then they can be proud of passing down this quality investment to their children. Um, and that's something that's also unprecedented in the area.
And so one of like with that entire shift that you just described, one of the things that I'm kind of most fascinated about and that I think about when I think about Bitcoin, generational wealth, generational thinking is when it changes your values and changes your incentives, it causes you to rethink your relationships with family and society. And in many ways, while we think about wealth in terms of money or assets, historically your family has been the genesis of your wealth as an individual human, right? Many of your business contacts and the industries that you would have access to go into stemmed from your familial relationships. And today, where again we have money that degrades, and when you break the money, right, you break people's social heuristics to think long term, to and then you break their actual relational heuristics to behave in a way where they build relationships with people long term. And that pervades even like the nuclear family, where parents and children don't really have the incentive to think about how it is they will support each other at different stages in their lives. Or as a middle-aged, productive adult, you have this heuristic that's more about abandoning the elderly for your own profit today. But on a standard where you're thinking longer term and you're thinking about generational wealth, and every member of the family has some stake in this, because that's going to be what's required to actually custody Bitcoin going into the future. It's not going to be this like individual libertarian, I hold my keys and nothing will ever go wrong, because all kinds of stuff can happen to you. And there's going to have to be sovereign families and sovereign communities. And so once you distribute the risk and the control of Bitcoin across people, you're also distributing the power across people. And now you have to have different relationships with these people. You have to say, we have to have a good working relationship for the entirety of our lives. What does that look like? What does that mean? And being at a place now where I am starting a family and I'm, starting to take on more responsibility with some of my older relatives, this like excites me deeply, and it gives me a lot of pride to, I think, be in a place where I'm realizing the value of these behaviors, just personally.
Yeah. I want to add one more thing, and then I want to open up to questions if any of you guys have. But being in El Salvador, well, first of all, growing up, I shared a bedroom with my two brothers and my mom. We didn't have a lot growing up, but we had each other, and like that was enough. Then I had mentors, and I'm seeing in El Zante right now just a complete shift in perspective. Whereas before there just weren't opportunities, no mentors, no guiding force to say like this is what's possible for you, and now there is, and just with that opportunity leads to kids wanting to participate in English class. There's coding schools there. There is a mind shift change that I can see just from being there 2 years, from 2 years to now, how now that there's more opportunity, there's more thought into how can I change the world even. Like there is, because they have mentors who have done some of these things, they're thinking about, oh, what is it possible for me to do? And just that mind shift change is going to change a lot for them wealth wise, because now instead of spending every dollar they earn, they're going to think, well, if I hold this, I can now invest into something that can change my life forever. And that's the real key to making more people generationally wealthy.
Any questions? Anybody? We got time for maybe one or two.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. A lot of what went well is because of the integrity of the leaders involved. So it wasn't about personal gain for them. Now, I'm not going to speak about the country as a whole, but just in El Zante in particular, the small town, it was really about bringing opportunities to the community. And they were willing to take a risk to be first to do it. And because of that risk that they took, opportunities followed. So even if, let's say, Bitcoin didn't work out, let's say it was something else, there's a huge benefit to being first and to trying it, even if it doesn't work out, because people who believe in it will come. And I think the first community to try something significant in the US will get a lot of help. I think there are people who want things like this to happen. And if you're willing to take a risk and be passionate and compassionate about how you do it, I think there is a huge opportunity. So that's what I would say about that.
And I think, not to have like a cop out answer, but we have to be whatever you have to go out and build the future you want to see. And I think the answer to your question comes out of a lot of events like this. It has to be organic, but people will come, hear each other, learn from each other, grow with each other, and someone will take the risk, and then it runs from there. Like, I don't have the answer, but if I had to wager money on it, I would say the more of these events that happen, the more and more likely it becomes we start to see this in many other places. All right. We're at 0 minutes, so thank you, everyone, for listening to the two of us riff.